Hello, everyone. Thank you to all of you for joining us for our Future Economy event. Thank you all so much for being here and for joining us. My name is Richard Aviles. I am with the Othering and Belonging Institute as part of the Arts and Cultural Strategy team and also as part of the Community Powers and Policy Partnerships team. So today, welcome to our second event of our Future Economy. And you may be wondering, what is our Future Economy if this is your first time here? Rooted in Richmond, California, our future economy connects global with the local by inviting people in community to join us. This time virtually, our first event was a hybrid model where we had a virtual audience and an in-person audience. Today we are virtual. And we are here basically to share reflections, learn and imagine and connect with others. We bring together residents, community organizers, public leaders, advocates, workers, entrepreneurs, artists, and scholars to learn and plan strategies for a just transition of the economy. And so thank you all for being here today. We have some speakers set up today here for us, and we're also going to be doing some interactive activities with you all. So I hope you join us for that. Before we get started, I'm going to share with you all just a little bit of the flow of the agenda so we have a feel of what is it that we're going to do. Let me find it. And here we go. We are here. Boom. So again, give you a quick little intro. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's going to guide us through a community building activity. I'm going to let you know what we did during the first episode. Sorry. On the side, I also do a lot of entertainment and podcasting, so I'm thinking in episodes and not events. But I'll give you a recap of the first event. We have a presentation from Eli Moore, also part of the CP3 team at OBI on divesting and investing. We'll do some little more exercises. We're going to hear from Ricardo, who's going to share with us models for economic strategy. And then we'll do a presentation and activity with Chelsea on arts and cultural strategy for a just transition. So I hope you're tuned in and excited for this awesome conversation. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Kroll. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Belonging and Community Builder at the Othering and Belonging Institute. And my background is dance and theater. So I would love to bring us into our bodies a little bit. We'll do a little bit of a guided reflection just for a few minutes, and then some very, very simple movement. And then we'll move into what we're about to do. And my personal motto is I love to bring movement into movements for justice. So that's me. I'm going to share my audio and I'm going to get us started. First, can everybody sit up just a little bit taller? Maybe you sit on the edge of your seat. Yes. Good. Just sitting on the edge of your seat. That's where I like everybody anyways when they're listening to me. So let's take a deep breath and let it out. Just roll your shoulders a little bit. And I really, really encourage you, even if you're a little shy, just roll your shoulders because our bodies are part of the wisdom that's required for us to shift and change and transform our world in ways that work for everyone. I invite you to put your feet flat on the floor and lengthen. I love the thumbs up from Kenneth. Thank you. I hope that's for me. And everybody, gently close or lower your eyes. Remove yourself from your screen for just a few moments. Notice your feet on the floor. Notice your clothes on your body. Notice that the air going into the nostrils is a little bit cooler than the air that's coming out. Let's do a 4-count breath series. What that means is you're going to breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, and hold for 4 counts. Very simple. Let's do that as a collective. So we're going to conspire. The word conspire literally means to breathe together. So that's what we're going to do. So emptying out the lungs just a little bit and let's go. Take a breath in, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Again, breathe in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3. Last one. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold. Just find your breath in. Just join us in the mindfulness exercise. Just finding your breath in your body. Staying in this mindfulness exercise. Let us pick an intention. Let's pick something that you're intending. How do you want to show up today? How do you want to bring yourself to this gathering? Now that you've tapped into your breath, tapped into your body, what do you want to bring? What is your intention? Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's presence, maybe it's enthusiasm, maybe it's deep listening. Whatever your intention is, just find that, distill it, commit to it, and let's all take another deep breath together, breathing in and out. And already we have someone in the chat saying that they're committing to courage and gratitude. So that's wonderful. Good. I'm just taking myself off spotlight so I can see your beautiful faces. And before we move on, before I turn it back over to our amazing MC, Richard, let's create a gesture. And I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3, and we're going to make a gesture, a physical gesture that represents what our intention is. So my intention right now is presence. And this will be my gesture. Create something simple, you staying in your chair, and on 3. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Let's do it one more time and make it even bigger, okay? Commit even more to it. Physically, mind, body, and spirit in this work. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Beautiful, beautiful. Now shake it out a little bit, shake it out, shimmy it out. And I'm turning it back over to Richard. Thanks so much for shimmying with me, Michelle. I saw you there. That was a great shimmy. And I'll see you in just a bit.
Thank you so much for that. Let me go back to sharing screen. I'm like, you all know if y'all do virtual engagements, then you know that there is a whole production happening behind the scenes. The screens are moving, we're doing everything, and so it's a lot of fun. So before we jump in, and thank you so much, I appreciate the comments about my little Freudian slip. I mean, they're episodes, right? I mean, I feel the whole world we're living in is a series, an interesting anthology series of sorts. Before we jump in, just to kind of give you a little bit about what happened in our first event. Again, really focusing on the outreach and partnership. We had a great opportunity to connect with different partners who are doing very similar work, not only in Richmond, California, but across the country as well. We were able to have, again, this was a hybrid event, so we had about 100 people gathering in person and about another 100 people gathering virtually. One of the big takeaways that we got from our first hybrid event was the interactiveness of the content. We were able to work alongside with Sarah in the BRC, which is the Belonging and Resident Company, a dance theater company that primarily works with the Other and Belonging Institute to translate very high academic frameworks that we use at the Institute into more palpable and kinetic somatic experiences. So we were able to incorporate playback theater, and we had really good, dope presentations. We had a presentation from the full spectrum group on Richmond, our future economy, and talking a little bit about just how do we different models of economic structures and how do we create generative economies. A little bit of the slide, again, that was shared from that presentation for you to see. I'm going to let you all take a moment to digest this. We also had a presentation from the SAGE Development Group. I'm going to let y'all digest this one. It's interesting how to coordinate and coalesce 3 hours of content into 5 minutes. We also had another presentation from Allensworth, the town that refuses to die. My favorite slide, one of my favorite slides from the presentation. And really, what the central question of that presentation was, what does a future where everyone you know is protected and treated with dignity look like? Again, a lot of the conversations and our future economy is rooted in the bigger work that we're also leading at the Institute on radical imagination as a tool for belonging. So how do we radically reimagine systems, structures, relationships, and values, all through this lens of radical imagination? And with that being said, I'm excited to turn it over to Eli, who is going to start us off for this event.
All right. What's up, everybody? Put up the slides. Where'd that thing go? Yeah, so like Richard said earlier, this is both work that's rooted in Richmond, but it's really about connecting across communities around some of these big picture questions that all communities are facing in one way or another about how we build our future economy and what are different strategies for doing that, how we can learn from each other across our different efforts, so that both in the city that we're in, I'm in Richmond, California, and wherever you are, we can be learning from each other and strategizing together. And just to kind of root us in this moment, I think it's important to name that we're in a hard place right now, right? We're defending against these attacks, this chaos, while also urgently needing to make progress on extreme economic inequality, on a planetary climate crisis, worsening well-being, deep racial and gender inequities, highly concentrated power. So how do we defend while also putting forward strategies to build the future we need? And that's a little bit of what I'm going to try and speak to and just really reflect back some of what we at the Institute see our partners and our movements doing, so that we can amplify some of that and share some of that shared analysis. So this regime in the US has promised, I guess somebody's drawing on the screen. That's cool. I don't know how that works, but I'll just keep going. They've promised to improve people's lives, and they will fail, and they will try to distract and lie, to distract us from this failure. And so our work in part right now is to expose false solutions and point to real solutions while affirming the way people are hurting and struggling, right? And real solutions means not just defending, but having a proactive agenda, the policies and the projects that would actually provide broad, meaningful, needed benefits and well-being. And it means having common sense arguments and stories to really paint the picture of how these solutions have worked and how they would work, and the positive impacts they'll have. So one of the ways that many movements today and historically have done this is through a framework of divesting and investing. And when we say that, we mean divesting, investing our labor, our work, our investments, our purchasing, what we buy, our endorsements, what we stand by, in our time and our energy and more. And if we're honest, the current regime has its own version of this, right? They're divesting from people on the planet, and they're investing in oligarchs' wealth and power. They're divesting from public education, healthcare, access to food, climate solutions, and more. And they're investing in crony payoffs, in select religious institutions and corporations, in rockets to escape to Mars someday, right? But what's our version of this that connects our varied communities and movements? Some have called it divesting from harm and investing in care. I think that really resonates and it helps connect some important dots because folks are divesting from fossil fuel products and industries. They're divesting from financialized capital like land flipping and futures, from low-wage extractive industries, and from racist companies and companies that finance othering, and more. And how do we kind of think about big picture what we're investing in? There's a whole body of work investing in community wealth building and models for shared prosperity. So things like mission-driven enterprises, cooperatives, community land trusts, social housing. You saw the slide earlier in the story that Taj James shared at the last event about the Sage Development Authority, which is a 100% Native-led organization that's launching a $340 million Native-owned wind project to provide clean energy while bringing economic growth and prosperity to the region of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, as one example. We're investing in resilient supply chains serving the common good, the public good. And so these are reliable networks of diverse businesses and platforms for fair trade that ensure access to food and other essentials. And the Cleveland Evergreen Cooperatives is a good example of that because they created this network of green industrial cooperatives to supply goods and services to each other and to large anchor institutions and their community in Cleveland. And we're investing in the commons, public and community-owned energy systems, transportation, transit, secure public communications platforms, healthy recreation spaces, and more. And then we're investing in human care for elders, for children, holistic healing, access to health services, reproductive justice. An example is the resilience hubs that many communities have been building, which provide a space for residents to connect to each other and then to prepare for and respond to crises when they arise. And then we're investing in ecological restoration and care to clean up that damaged soil, water, air, forests. A great example is the Transformative Climate Communities projects across California, which are these community-driven climate solutions projects that are really led by and take a holistic approach to, and are led by the communities who've been most harmed by the climate crisis and environmental harm. And there are other ways to think about what we're investing in. That just kind of gets us started with a list. But let's think about what we have to invest. What is our power? What is our economic power? Because in this moment, it's easy to think that, oh, we're just locked out of power. We really don't have power. But our economic power comes in many different forms. And so it's really thinking about what's within our collective reach. And we can think about it at the community level. As workers, we can organize labor actions and strikes so that we can bargain for the common good to build institutions that really give workers and communities governing power and not just deals with fragmented contractors with limited power. We have our consumer power, right? Our purchasing power, boycotts, conscious consumer campaigns. Those have historically been essential for bringing down authoritarian regimes. And then we can organize our labor through new cooperatives, whether that's producer cooperatives of different producers or consumer cooperatives buying together or worker cooperatives. And you'll hear more about that from Ricardo in a minute. We can organize community-controlled funds to really shift our resources and our capital towards projects through credit unions, rotating funds, real estate cooperatives, that really put workers and community in governing power over investment priorities. And then, of course, walkouts and slowdowns to really pull institutions and push institutions towards greater belonging and justice. And when no funds are available for the needs that we have, then we mobilize our own labor through mutual aid networks. And a lot of us have been building those, especially since the pandemic hit. So then shifting from community level power, economic power, to institutions, we really need to question some of the ways that our institutions have actually been bought in and dependent on some of the harmful economic structures that we have. And if we're going to meet this moment, then we have to question some of those things and think bigger about how we meet the scale of the need. Foundation endowment is one of those areas, and some foundations have already made moves to spend up or spend down their endowments, not just the 5%, really to align the full endowment with that mission impact and invest in institutions and enterprises that have belonging built into their mission and their structure. Similarly with union pensions, right, to align the pension fund investments with the common good and working class needs. And then anchor institutions have been really powerful for the way that they're purchasing, and other powers can be leveraged for building a belonging economy. And lastly, shareholder action, right? So how do we use that shareholder power to bend corporations towards justice and the common good? And then local government. So local government, if you think about the economic power, it's not just through its purchasing and its permitting and all those powers, but it's also through how it can tax more problematic areas of the economy and fund real solutions. And one example of that is the mansion tax in Los Angeles, which was passed by voters, which applies to transactions of properties sold for more than $5 million. And has been generating $30 to $50 million per month in revenue for social housing, for homelessness prevention, for community land trusts, for a full range of housing solutions. And then even more recently, Seattle voters passed an excessive compensation tax where any corporation paying their employees more than $1 million a year has to pay an additional tax that the revenue is then going to support social housing as well. And then I want to dive in a little bit in more detail to the polluters pay taxes, and specifically the polluters pay measure in Richmond, California. And this really came out of the question of how can a city that's dependent on the fossil fuel industry invest in itself to build out a fair and regenerative economy. And polluters pay is about the corporations who have been the most responsible for and have benefited the most from the climate crisis paying the most to solve and move us into a healthier economy. And this fits into a broader range of progressive revenue measures, which at its heart means those who have the greatest ability to pay are those who pay the most. So investing in a just transition means resourcing the needs and the visions of workers and community members and the strategic sectors that can serve that community. And in Richmond, a group of environmental justice community groups, progressive city council members, unions, and researchers got together and worked on this and created a ballot initiative that would make the refinery there pay $1 per barrel of oil processed in the city. And they proposed this to the city council, and the city council then put it on the ballot so it could go up for a vote. And then Chevron, the owner of that refinery, approached the city council offering to pay new taxes over 10 years in exchange for the council taking it off the ballot. And the city leaders and the community negotiated with Chevron and landed a 10-year deal of $550 million in new tax payments that the city could then use towards a whole range of public priorities. And it now has a public process to set those priorities that I'm sure a lot of folks who are local to Richmond are already engaged with. And so then that raises the question for us, for the Richmond community, and for any community that passes this kind of measure, of what new city and community capacities are needed to build out the future economy, and how can those types of resources really catalyze economic transformation at the scale needed to provide tax revenue, to provide jobs and other benefits and necessities met by the local economy. So those are some of the ways that this divest and invest framework can apply, and in particular how it can be a framework for strategy at the local level. And with that, I will pass it off. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Eli. Appreciate you and appreciate everybody's comments in the chat and questions. I would love to now kind of get into our body once again around the things that Eli was talking about. Because like I said, mind, body, and spirit is required for the work that we're doing. So if you're able or willing, please take a stand, literally and figuratively. Let's take a stand. So everybody up. Eli too, Eli, Chelsea, everybody up. Okay. And just move your arms a little bit. If you're able to, bounce around a little bit. Good, good, good. All right, and now take your right leg back, to your right leg back, and put your hands out. Curl your fingers in, and you're gonna pull that right hand back and push it out just like that, like a little spring, right? I'm seeing for the folks I see, that looks great. So spring it out and bring it back. This is called the palm heel strike in martial arts. And it is a deadly strike right now. It's not deadly, but it's powerful. So we're going to claim the power of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to picture in front of us what we're saying no to. And what Eli's language was, what are we divesting from? What are we divesting from? Let's say no to the things we're divesting from. All right, so let's picture those things, whatever they are to you, and collectively what those are. And on 3, we're gonna all punch out and we're gonna say no together. We're gonna do that 4 times on the right side. Ready? 1, 2, 3, no. 1, 2, 3, no. 1, 2, 3, no. 1, 2, 3, no. Good, shake that out. All right, all right. Love that people are standing. Thank you for joining me. Now we're going to go on the other side. And for those of you who have done this exercise with me before, you're the ones, all right? And we're going to say, this time we're going to say yes. Things we're investing in the culture of care that we're investing in, whatever that is for you, find that, and we're going to not break through it. We're going to lift it up. We're going to lift it up, right? So you can, Milana, you can remove my spotlight so everybody can see it. And we're going to do yes on 3. Ready? So 1, 2, 3. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Good. Shake that out. Woohoo. Looking good out there. Wonderful. Now slide yourself back. I have to slide myself because I have wheels on my chair. Slide yourself back to the screen. And let's all take a deep breath and let it out. How many people get to punch into the air and say yes and no in the middle of a work day? This is a good day. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. And I'll turn it back over to Richard.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Well, now, I mean, it's my turn to pass it over. So we're just going to do the pass the baton today. But I'm going to pass it over to Ricardo Nunez with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, who's also going to talk to us. So Ricardo, take it away. In Spanish, we have a word for this, and it's called tocayo, and that means usually when you share the name with someone else, it's kind of weird to say your own name twice, so you just say tocayo. So I'll pass it on to my tocayo, Ricardo.
Oh, gracias, Tocayo. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you all today. I'm Ricardo Nunez from Sustainable Economies Law Center. I'm going to be talking about, I'll share a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm from Sustainable Economies Law Center, and We exist to bridge the gap in legal expertise needed to transition from destructive economic systems to innovative and cooperative alternatives. And I just want to say that I'm going to share some examples today, but don't let these examples be the limits of your imagination of what's possible. There's other examples out there. And I'm just happy to start to seed some future conversations and ideas. One of the uh, tools that I really like to see used, or maybe before that, I'm going to be talking about transformative models for economic strategy, increasing people power, getting our money from Wall Street to our street. And as I'm talking about this, I'm going to be coming from a bit of a legal perspective, but you're going to be, if you have an idea and you're talking to an attorney and they're telling you that it can't be done, find a different attorney. Don't listen to that attorney. Do it anyway, because if it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. One of the tools that I really like to promote as one of these transformative tools are cooperatives. So we've heard a lot about, or I've heard cooperative mentioned a few times, but what is a cooperative? And so for some people, it's a tax category. We actually have a beneficial tax category under the IRS for cooperatives operating cooperatively. We also, most states have a cooperative legal statute, so you can incorporate as a cooperative, or you can just form as another type of legal entity, incorporate those cooperative principles, or it could be really any cooperative group that's practicing cooperative principles and values. There's 7 international cooperative principles that are recognized here, which are very different from capitalist principles, which have been reaffirmed by the Supreme Court over and over again, that the purpose of a corporation is to maximize shareholder profit. And I think you folks on this call today are trying to find different models and different tools to build a different type of economic relationship. And so just to highlight 2 things that I like about co-ops, one is that it's a built-in democratic structure. So it's 1 member, 1 vote. And another is that there's built-in extractive finances. So a lot of cooperative legal entities have some cap on how much outside investors can get. And when we think about cooperatives, there's a few different types of cooperatives that we can be talking about. And most of the time, when you think about a co-op, think about who are the members? Who are the members stewarding this cooperative? Who the cooperative is built for? And who's going to receive the benefit? And so one example are consumer cooperatives, so that are organized by consumers that want to achieve better prices or qualities in goods and services. So like the PCC market, community markets up in the Pacific Northwest. Lots of you all are probably familiar with REI Co-op as a consumer cooperative. If you can, please support the workers there fighting for unionization of their cooperative. And then another great example is the Mariposa Cooperative in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so who are the members? It's the consumers, the shoppers. What are their benefits? They get discounted items, they get their annual dividends. And patronage is like how much they're participating in their cooperative's activities. And for a consumer co-op, it's that economic activity. One of my favorite co-ops are the worker co-ops. And so as the name suggests, worker cooperatives are owned by a group of workers, in contrast to, like I just mentioned, consumer co-ops where the members are the shoppers. So there's lots of examples of cooperatives. We have New Era Windows Cooperative, which has a very beautiful, inspiring story where the workers, it was the first sit-in of a factory sit-in in, I think, 40 or 50 years at that point. Where the former owner of the business decided to just shutter the business without paying the workers, giving them their back wages, et cetera. And so the workers occupied the factory until they were able to negotiate and buy the factory for themselves. And so that's in Chicago. And then another great example is the Cooperative Home Care Associates. That's the largest worker cooperative in the United States. They're based in the Bronx. And so when we're thinking about worker cooperatives, it's not just for people, 12 people, 15 people. We can scale these to over 1,000 or more individuals. And so again, when we're thinking about worker co-ops, who are the members, the workers, what's their benefit? They get to collectively decide every day on their workplace, on their work, on their benefits, etc. And then how is their patronage measured? It's usually measured by hours, but you can do it different ways. And like I said, it can scale. So we can look at international examples of where cooperatives have scaled. One is in Italy, the Emilia-Romagna region, where 42 million people are using cooperatives to battle unemployment. There's more than 7,500 cooperatives, 2/3 of which are worker owned, and 10% of the workforce in this area is employed by cooperatives. And another area is in northern Spain, in the Basque region. And one of the largest cooperatives there, and I think one of the largest cooperatives in the world, is the Mondragon cooperatives, where there's over 63,000 worker owners at 110 cooperatives. They have subsidiary companies, they have a foundation, they have a university, they have their own insurance system where if one of the cooperatives isn't doing well and there's a market failure and the cooperative closes, they have an insurance system where they retrain those workers and find another cooperative in their network to become members at. Some more examples of when we're thinking about independent contractors or like small producers. We have the Northwoods Pioneer Gallery and Gifts Cooperative, which is an artist-owned producer cooperative in northern Minnesota. It started in 1972. It's now longest continuously operating art and craft co-op in the state of Minnesota. And another is the Gilded Cooperative. So Gilded is a freelancer-owned cooperative. It was incubated by the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, which is the national membership or national business association of worker cooperatives and democratic workplaces. And what Gilded does is it brings independent contractors together to become members of this cooperative, provides contract management, invoicing, guaranteed payments, tax preparation, and healthcare, so that the independent contractors can focus on what they're doing for their business. And so that's another example of how we can bring small independent producers together. But then when we're thinking about this at an ecosystem level, how are we transforming our relationships in all different aspects? And so I wanted to touch upon land return and radical home ownership that the Sustainable Economies Law Center supports and helps. And so when we're thinking about our housing, I'm thinking about housing cooperatives. What is real property law, and what is our relationship to real estate? And it's actually just a bundle of rights. And so how can we start to transform our relationship to these bundles of rights, whether it's to possess, occupy, build, use, transfer, etc. And so how can we start collectivizing our housing? And so there's some beautiful examples out there, like the Berkeley Student Housing Cooperatives and others. We have community land trusts as well to decommodify land and housing, to take it off the speculative market. And it actually was started by African American farmers looking to access land. And the first one was formed in Southwest Georgia as a way to help sharecroppers and tenant farmers who were systematically forced off their land when they attempted to register to vote. And so we can look at that beautiful lineage of community land trusts and really take inspiration from them. One example in the Bay Area of a land trust is Segurite Land Trust, where Sustainable Economies Law Center is working with them to help create and sustain their activities. We have lots of resources on that. And when we're talking about land return and land back, there's lots of mechanisms and legal tools that we can use. And so we've created many resources on our website if you want to check them out later about what are different tools that we can use. And one that we created was a rematriation easement or kinship conservation easement. How are we rebuilding our kinship with the land? And so we wanted to honor the people who we worked with and the tribes that we worked with as we were developing this. But one thing I just want to highlight is that when we're looking at our relationship to land and trying to figure out how do we build a different ecosystem and different economic relationships in our local areas that we can actually decide what are the prohibited activities in these lands that we're occupying. And we can define that collectively together. And we can define how to permanently protect the land in our legal documents. And the last example that I'll talk about today is a hybrid or multi-stakeholder cooperatives, and one that we've been supporting since its inception and helped incubate was the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. And so the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, we worked with them to create a set of cartoon bylaws. And we really, because when we're trying to distribute power, we need to make sure that people understand how to access their power and what rights and responsibilities they have. And so if we're just producing long, boring legal documents, it's going to disempower a lot of the folks that we're trying to build power with. And so this East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative put into their bylaws that their mission is to develop cooperative, affordable real estate alternatives that empower people to create intentional communities that are ecologically, emotionally, spiritually, culturally, and economically regenerative. And they've anchored their cooperative in a series of principles. So one, that it's centered, that people of color are centered. Another is that they decentralize power. How are they spreading power to as many people as possible? And third, the permanent community stewardship. How are we taking this land, whether it's real estate or housing, commercial real estate or housing, off the speculative market, and stop looking at it as a commodity and looking at it in a different regenerative way. There's ways that we can build in distributed governance. And so this is the slide from their bylaws about how they do that. And also it's a multi-stakeholder cooperative. So there's different types of owners, different owner classes that help steward and support the cooperative as it moves forward. So when we're talking about all these legal things, I just want to say that the law is very complicated. And what usually has ended up happening is when these laws are being created, they're captured by the wealthy, and the wealthy create the laws so that only they can jump through them. And so it's really difficult sometimes to get projects off the ground that are big. And I just want to highlight that study groups have been pivotal in the creation of a lot of alternative economic activities. And one that was started by our friends at Repair Nations that works with Black communities in Oakland to start and operate cooperatives, was started by building a set of study groups around and using this book, Collective Courage, a history of African American cooperative economic thought and practice. And so how can we learn from our ancestors on building these alternative economic visions? So that was a lot of serious lawyer stuff, or at least some of it was. Law is complicated. And so if you want to receive some legal advice or at least legal information and talk with us, you can come to our legal cafe, our Resilient Communities Legal Cafe. Go to our website, theselk.org, and you can sign up. We hold them 3 times per month. They're virtual, and it's just a great place to come and brainstorm and think through your alternative and cooperative and regenerative economic projects that you're doing. So with that, I think I'm over my time. I'll pass it back to Richard. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. I'm wondering actually if you can also spotlight Ricardo, Mailana. There are a couple of questions and there's still some time. So I just kind of wanted to ask them if you're okay with that. But there's a question in here that says, are there any examples of CLTL used for businesses or commercial property as a tool for a worker co-op?
There's community land trusts that have purchased real estate. And then I think there's some examples in the Midwest. I think it's in Minnesota, where a real estate cooperative was formed. They generated community investments from folks in the community, bought commercial real estate, and then incentivize the creation of worker cooperatives in those properties. So that's an example, at least one. And there's been a few other attempts at doing that. And in fact, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is also buying commercial real estate, and they're refurbishing the properties, and they're going to be opening some worker co-op businesses there too.
Thank you for that. Then I'm going to ask one more question, if that's okay with you. And I'm actually curious about this, especially I think just kind of the interesting limbo that we're in, right? As we're talking about radical imagination, we'll talk a little bit more about arts and culture in a bit. But there's this notion of like, right, we have to envision new worlds, and it's very difficult, right? Because we're not going to create a new world from scratch. I mean, there is a moment where we're deconstructing and reconstructing, and both these strategies happen in tandem. There could be what we consider to be progression to actually be regressions in some ways or not. So there's a question that came in the chat that I'm curious to hear your opinion about this, but are there any elements of capitalism that are, I don't know if the word is important in my personal opinion, but are there any elements of capitalism that, are worth keeping on the table in order for economies to thrive? Right? That's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
Is there something about, I mean, because also like in urban planning, right? I know, don't get me started about urban planning and social work. I'm a both, and there's Janes in both the fields, and I call it the curse of the Janes. But
Mhm,
Jane Jacobs talked about competition, right? As something
mhm,
that allowed for communities to thrive. And I've been thinking, but even in like sort of pre-colonial examples of urban planning, and I define urban planning as social systems design, there was still competition that happened. In Tenochtitlan, it was the tianguis, there was the marketplace. So in some aspects, are there some of these elements of capitalism, of the current economic structure? Even capitalism feels like, ugh, but of the current economic structure that can translate to a just transition.
Um, I think that as I define and understand capitalism as a distinct system, let's call it, no, because I think that competition, like you said, has already existed. Us as individuals, we already existed. Markets already existed, and so how are we transforming our relationship to these things? And then so what is the system and the principles that we're wanting to put into that system? Like what is that? What are we trying to do with these things? These are all tools for us to figure out how do we want to be in relationship, and hopefully right relationship with each other and the land. Um, and so competition is not going to go away in a cooperative commonwealth system. I think it'll still be there. It's just going to show up in a different way. Just like um, cooperative economic practice in the United States has a very distinct and very different flavor than the cooperative um, practices that I see here in Mexico. I'm in Pátzcuaro, Michoacan. And so with the cooperatives that I'm working with here, whether they're artist cooperatives or consumer cooperatives, that it's just a different set of cultural practices that they're bringing into the space, even if we can say that both use a cooperative model with cooperative principles to organize themselves. So.
100%. And thank you for sharing that. So I heard two things, right? That sort of as we talk about just transitions, it's not just sort of limited to an economic analysis, but it's also a rewriting and a restructuring of relationships, right? To ourselves, to relationship to wealth, to each other. And in some cases also, I mean, the social worker in me always has to be trauma informed and is talking about financial traumas, right? Because they also exist in that ways. And thank you for bringing up Mexico. We can talk about co-ops in Cholula. I was in Mexico City for 2 years, so much to talk about there. And then this is the last question I'll ask. Somebody is asking if does self-help forming cooperatives to adopt flat structures like worker self-directed? Yeah, like what is sort of, I know you mentioned the cafe, but is there any other type of sort of services or TA of sorts that's self-provide?
Yeah, of course. It's so fun when the term we created comes back to me slash us as like yeah, so we are a worker self-directed nonprofit, and it's not the best branding, but that's the name that we decided to give it. And so we're a democratically run nonprofit, and put on programming a year-long learning journey actually for nonprofits who want to either start as a democratic organization or convert to a democratic organization. So I'll share some links in the chat, but if folks are interested, they can get more resources on how to democratize the social sector, how to democratize nonprofits, to build those flat structures into their day-to-day lives.
Well, thank you so much. I promise I won't throw more questions at you, but I feel like definitely there will be a follow-up conversation. The tocayos can talk for hours, y'all. So thank you so much with that, Ricardo and Selka as well. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea Gregory, who is also a member of a Belonging Resident Company. And Chelsea's going to share with us some examples of the ways in which arts and culture can be integrated into just transitions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricardo, and everyone else who has presented thus far. Um, we're going to shift gears just a little bit, and we're going to think about arts and culture, as Richard mentioned. And I'm sure there's so much buzzing in your mind right now with these incredible questions. And this is actually a great transition because arts and culture is one of those things that we've seen be commodified by capitalism. We've seen all of these ways now that many of us relate to arts and culture as something only that we consume rather than something that we can actually be involved in or be changed by or be creators of. And so when we think about arts and cultural strategy as part of how we work towards just transition, how we make sense of what's happening and what we'd like to vision and expand our radical imagination to see what actually is possible. Arts and cultural strategy is one of the ways that we can come back to and reclaim what is naturally part of being human, right? Since humans existed, we have been telling stories, we have been dancing, we have been singing, we've been weaving baskets, we've been creating all kinds of things that are connected to our identities, they're connected to our ways of surviving and thriving in the places that we live. So I'd love first for everyone to just take a moment to think in this moment of an example of an artist, a creative work, a cultural practice of some form that you have found to be nourishing, uplifting, inspiring, or energizing in the past few months. So just taking a moment to think about that. Is there a song that's been on repeat for you? Is there a TV show or a film? Is there a cultural practice that you've engaged in recently? Beautiful. Yeah, full moon ceremonies I'm seeing. Pichka. Oh, I'm interested in what that is. Keep them coming. If there's a song or an artist, a poem, a book, yes, beautiful. Thank you, Shane. Parable of the Sower. So relevant right now. Bobby McFerrin, yes, absolutely. Yeah, cooking, music, salsa classes, right? Keeping ourselves moving. Keep them coming. Feel free to keep those coming. And I just invite that as a way of grounding ourselves in the ways that arts are already part of our lives, the ways that arts and culture, yes, lullabies, nighttime lullabies. I love that. Oh, an album that I want to check out now. Latino America, Calle 13. Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. Dabka. Yes, absolutely. So we can go back into these and copy and paste so we can check them out later. But I wanted to start with that opportunity to just ground ourselves. This is already part of our lives. And so now we're going to look a little bit at how arts and culture can be woven into our work towards just transition since it's already such an integral part of our lives, even if we don't realize it. So I'm going to share screen in this moment. All right. Oh, excuse me. Okay, there we go. So we're going to touch briefly on specifically the way that arts and cultural strategy figures into OBI's transformative research framework. just to give us a little bit of context on what is possible in terms of the impact of arts and culture. OBI's approach to transformative research reminds us that it is meant to inform, catalyze, and support action for collective liberation. And so when we're thinking about research, the information that helps us make our decisions and envision what's possible, there are often hierarchies in terms of what information, what data we receive. So cultural strategy within transformative research is a political decision to disrupt dominant knowledge forms by intentionally widening the field of data, the practices of analysis, how they are shared and activated in the world. And if we move down here to the second paragraph, we can see that cultural strategy in transformative research is the intentional decision within a research process to acknowledge, validate, notice, and integrate knowledge, practices, and worldviews that have led to survival, continuity, and thriving in the context of racial capitalism and white supremacy. So when we integrate the arts, cultural practice, vernacular ways of knowing and being, the aesthetic, the emotional, the embodied, intuition, traditional knowledge, noticing, listening, ritual, many things that you all mentioned in the chat, that is a strategic decision to shift power in a research process. And whether we realize it or not, we're doing research every day, right? In terms of how we navigate this time on the clock of the world. The Belonging Resident Company is one way that OBI engages arts and cultural strategy in its work. And we explore various frameworks through the Belonging Resident Company. And then OBI also has 4Rs, which help us get even more clear about the ways that arts and cultural strategy can show up. So we want to make sure that any work we're doing towards just transition is thorough and accurate, right? So we can consider what are the worldviews that are shaping our research, and how can we integrate arts and culture methods to allow us access to an expanded range of data, information, and processes for drawing conclusions to create a more thorough and ultimately accurate process. Some of you may already know about scientist Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is in Potawatomi, who was told that she wasn't doing science, but she was actually weaving together indigenous methodologies with science in the ways that she was approaching her work around flowers and this research between flower colors and bees. Resonance is a big piece, right? Deepening alignment between any research process or exploration and people's inner experience of that. Participatory action research is very useful here, and often uses poetry and various other forms of arts and culture to create greater accessibility and more sticky engagement through honoring and engaging a wider range of our experience as humans. And then reach and regeneration are the last two. So through arts and cultural strategy, we can expand who is engaged, who is activated in the work that we're doing, whether that is research or organizing. Arts and cultural practice are flexible and inventive in how to reach audiences, respondents, participants, share findings. And then if we move to regeneration, a cultural strategy within PAR leads with honors and takes seriously the practices, language, ways of being and knowing that have long supported communities in the face of systemic oppression. So a research process or any process, any organizing process should reconnect people to ancestral, under attack, or even contemporary practices deemed outside of a research process. We have an example here of parceleras, an intergenerational group of Afro-Caribbean women in Puerto Rico who are working to fight displacement in their communities, while also building community capacity through arts and culture. So we'll now move into some more specific examples. We'll start with Shishkale, which was created by a Pomo woman of the Manchester Band, a group that is indigenous to this land now known as California. Bernadette Smith collaborated with a company called Dancing Earth to create this piece at Segorite Land Trust, which was mentioned earlier in our time together today. And so they came together at Segorite, oh, I'm sorry, came together at Segorite Land Trust to create a performance piece and develop that performance piece based on Bernadette Smith's work around protecting the tan oak tree. And the tan oak tree, many of you may know, and oak trees in general, acorns in general, and other products from the oak tree have been central to many of the indigenous groups of this land, now known as California, for thousands of years. And though many of those trees have been threatened by pesticides. And so Bernadette Smith created this performance piece as a way of raising awareness around the organizing work that is happening to protect those trees. Also, another Indigenous uh, project in which Indigenous methodology has become central is the Klamath River Project. Some of you all may have heard of the huge wins that have happened in relation to just transition and the ways in which the Klamath River has now been undammed, allowing the salmon to run again and allowing water to move to places that it has been much needed for a long time. And so this project was a collaboration with the Estria Foundation and used murals that also highlighted Indigenous aesthetics and Indigenous methodologies as ways of organizing around just transition and water rights. Save Narmada movement, another movement related to a river in Madhya Pradesh, India. This as in many cases, the connection between the people and the river run deep, right? Cultural, spiritual, economic dimensions. And so cultural practices have been woven into the organizing that's happening to address the ways in which these industries have deprived people of water and also flooded certain areas of India. And here's another example of cultural practice as part of the organizing work to protect the Narmada River, and bring about just transition for the many people who've been impacted by these dam projects. Carolina Caicedo is someone who Richard introduced me to her work. She has a project called Be Damned. And Be Damned is part of this ongoing body of work investigating how man-made infrastructures affect bodies of water as well as the people that are impacted by those bodies of water. So you can see in this piece, she has created visual art. On one side of this piece are images, and then on the other side is information about the history of these places, photographs of villages that have been impacted by the damming and redirecting of rivers. And this is another example of that. And the Yuma people are a group of people who were resisting the damming of these rivers. So Serpent River Book is this project. And we'll move forward to one more example, which connects very much to our work in Richmond. This work is called Cry You One. Mondo Bizarro and Art Spot Productions have created a while back, actually in 2013, a theater production that was immersive and moved as a procession through disappearing wetlands of South Louisiana. And they were connecting harm to these local ecosystems with the harm to the human population of that area, which is also known as Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley is a nickname for the stretch of land between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that has over 200 petrochemical plants and refineries, which have caused rates of cancer that far exceed the government's definition of acceptable risk. And similar to the work that OBI is doing in Richmond, CryUN started as an effort to lift up the perspectives of community members most impacted by these industries, which include Indigenous community members in that area, as well as community members of African descent, also various other groups of folks in that area. It was a direct response to conversations around the BP oil spill settlement, where people in positions of power dominated that process and shut out the voices of the most impacted community members. Um, and so, a few other links that I want to share before we wrap up this section. Center for Cultural Power um, has an initiative called Climate Woke, which has a lot of wonderful resources on how to use arts and culture for just transition, and Movement Generation also has a lot of wonderful examples of how to use arts and cultural strategy. I'm going to stop share right now. And we're going to transition into a little bit of journaling and some breakout groups now. Okay, so I'd like to give you a moment just to pull out either a journal or create a Google Doc, open up a notes doc in your phone, whatever is the most accessible way for you to journal in this moment. And I'd like you to just reflect on these different strategies that we've explored today. Yes, absolutely, Isabel. Pen and paper is welcome. We love to keep it old school whenever possible. Any way that you would like to journal. And so just reflecting for a moment on these different strategies, we've discussed investing and divesting, we've discussed legal strategy, and we've discussed arts and culture. And so what we're going to do now is think about a specific strategy for just transition that you are interested in exploring further. And Richard is going to give a little bit of context on the ways that OBI engages radical imagination. And you're going to have a moment to journal a little bit about how you might apply radical imagination to a specific strategy for just transition that you would like to explore or learn more about. Richard, can I pass the mic back to you to ground us in this idea of radical imagination?
Thank you so much for that. I was like talking and was muted the whole time. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chelsea. And of course, when we talked a little bit about Carolina Caicedo's work, there is a dance piece associated with both of the work that she did. One of them is called Apariciones, which was done at the Huntington Library, and the other one was called. It's because we changed the title by the end, but it's called "Thank You for Hosting Us as We Mend Our Broken Bodies," and it's all about the impact the environment has. And I was a dancer for both the pieces, so we wear multiple hats here. As Chelsea mentioned, we are thinking a lot about radical imagination as a tool for belonging at the Othering and Belonging Institute. And that is not to say we first also have to give credit that a lot of the writing of radical imagination is rooted in Black feminist literature. Of course, there was mentions in there in the book of talking a rereading Parable of the Sower. Octavia Butler was out here professing, maybe off by a couple of months, but girl, we're like in the first act of the book. So definitely now feels like a book we all need to read. And so when we talk about imagination, there's a lot of different groundings and framings on how to talk about imagination. And the one sort of definition that I'm sitting with is imagination is it's a creative act. And it's act of conjuring images that may be logical, that may not be logical. But the beautiful thing about imagination is that if you imagine it, then it's possible. And really talking about the possibility, right? And understanding that our director, John A. Powell, gives a very beautiful example about imagination and the fact that it is intangible at times, where the example that he mentions is the wind. So we can't see the wind, but there is evidence that shows us that the wind exists, right? It's the sensation of a wind caressing your face. It's the way the water moves when you see a gust of wind come through, the way you see the tree swaying. So there's evidence of wind. And so when we think about imagination and thinking about how do we get to a just transition of economies, it's thinking about that it may not be tangible, but to the point that Ricardo made earlier, it's there's evidence of what is possible. And when we talk about radical, we are also being very mindful of the connotations that the word radical implies. And yes, it's a yes and approach to that. We are very mindful of that connotation and stand by it. And in addition to that, we also go to the etymology of the word radical, which is root. And so really it goes back to understanding what is at the root of everything, right? Even earlier, the comment about capitalism, and it was really understanding beyond capitalism as a mechanism or an economic system. What is at the root of capitalism? We started talking about competition, we talked about markets, and there's still something in there that we all relate to, right? We're still doing exchanges. There's still a way that we're creating markets, and there's still supply and demand, right? For the lack of better words. And so, what is at the root causes at the root of all of these systems that can be reimagined, right? And when we're talking about why I use the word reimagination is because we also have to be mindful that the current economic system that we live in was someone's imagination or somebody's imagination. And so, thus, it is possible to reimagine. I say all that to say, just to give some grounding on the context of radical imagination. Also, in some of the work that we have done, we've been doing some conversations around just when do we imagine, and have realized that a lot of the imagination is better and stronger collectively. And when we collectively buy into this new imagination. So we're going to do a little bit of a journaling activity in the last couple of minutes. I see that Mark hands is raised. Yes, Mark.
I want to say that we need to consider there's a small number of companies that are excellent. In my own field of invasive plant control, Invasive Plant Control Incorporated has been around for 40 years and it's 100% reliable and 100% ethical. So I think we need to get the word out about the few companies that are actually good.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. Yes, I think in alignment to what I'm sharing, right, about reimagination, there is much that we can learn about what is existing, about what is working, right? And maybe there's a way to extract and piecemeal. We know that the REM, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're not necessarily constructing a new world from scratch. There have been things that are working. And like Chelsea mentioned, particularly in cultural strategy, a lot of the ways in which cultural strategies have been passed on, and we talked about from a cultural strategy standpoint, have been able to exist even amongst oppression, right? There's a lot of practices that are still used in Mexico. The tianguis, it's the marketplace, it's still an indigenous word that was used way back in the day.
Invasive
Um,
Plant Control Incorporated has turned down requests people want to pay them for something that's not ethical.
100%.
Only accept money from people who want to hire them that are.
100%. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to also give the mic to Michelle. I think you might have a question right before we move to this final activity. Also, be mindful that some of these conversations, as you've heard from Mark and now Michelle, we can also engage in those conversations in the small breakout groups. Michelle.
Hello, hello. Wonderful, wonderful information. My heart right now is on co-ops. How could I make that something that can be economical and helpful as far as homelessness? How could you know, putting pulling money together, but I guess it has to be the right people to pull the money because the people who need the housing might not have anything to pull, money or resources or whatever. But that is something that I'm really interested in. And so
Thank you so much. So we're going to move now into our breakout groups. There is a journaling prompt. What we're curious to hear for this journaling prompt is again, we've discussed a couple of different strategies that we today. We talked about investment versus divesting. We talked about legal strategies, and we talked about arts and culture. So what is a strategy for you that you're the most interested in? And also, we're going to ask you to journal about a place and space or community that you'd like to apply some radical imagination to. And again, what is the one way that one of these strategies could be useful in supporting this just transition of space, place, or community? As you're journaling, we're going to be doing the technical things in the background to set up the breakouts. And in those breakouts, please introduce yourself, name, pronouns, and something that you are sitting with this event and maybe some of that journaling. I know the chat is a hot take moment, so that's an opportunity to discuss. That being said, let's get the breakout room started and then we'll come back shortly. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining and participating in those breakout groups. I'm sure it was not enough time. And I mean, I'm full disclosure because I know the conversations are good. I see Brian saying no. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to enter my email in the, oh, sorry. The monitors are changing and I got lost. Sorry, y'all. But I'm going to enter my chat in the email. I mean, my email in the chat. So if you have any comments or feedback you want to share to us personally, please feel free to do so. More than happy to respond to anything that might have come up for you all. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. If you have signed up for this event, then you are part of our list where we'll be sending updates. The next step is that we're going to be hosting a series of local workshops with folks in the city of Richmond. So if you're in Richmond, you'll hear about that. And then we're going to come back and do another public event. What we learned from the first session, it's an interesting way to use the city of Richmond as a real-time example and case study of the things that we're presenting and the relationships that we're building to talk about a just transition, while at the same time connecting also to more national conversations that are happening and also global examples. It's what our global justice team here at OBI calls glocal. It's also a really fun thing to say. It's the glottal of it all. So we'll be in contact with you all. And again, my email's in the chat if you have any questions or feedback you want to give back to us. And with that being said, thank you for joining us on this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, because we have learned that our content tends to go international and we don't even know, but we're grateful. And again, we're committed to hopefully building an economy in a world where everyone belongs. And with that being said, me despido. Bye bye.